host. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we're going to talk about our second presentation of our series of 3 in simulation standards, which is planning an effective interprofessional education, specifically focusing on simulation. We planned a 3-discipline IPE at Pikes Peak Community College, and of great importance is that our presenters have no affiliations with any of our material that you might see or any of the equipment that we are using. So our panelists today, as Rio said, my name is Kimberly Whitten-Chung. I will let the other ladies introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Amy Reed. I'm the dental assisting department chair at Pikes Peak Community College.
Leslie?
I'm Leslie Rude. I am a volunteer standardized patient.
Hi, and I am Adrienne Wilk. At the time of the IPE, I was the nursing simulation coordinator at Pikes Peak Community College, and I'm now an assistant professor of nursing at Austin Peay State University, just north of Nashville, Tennessee.
Thank you, ladies. So our objectives today are to describe the requirements of compliance with the healthcare simulation standards for best practice, simulation enhanced interprofessional education. That is a mouthful, goodness gracious. So simulation enhanced IPE is just one of the healthcare simulation standards for best practice. And if you're curious about those, you guys can go back to the recording. Our previous presentation was all about the best practice or the healthcare simulation standards of best practice. Second, we want to demonstrate a belief in the need for simulation enhanced IPE at your institution. We are focusing on simulation enhanced IPE, but just a quick plug, IPE is the experience of working with other disciplines, learning with and about other disciplines. So while we're talking about sim enhanced IPE here, IPE itself does not have to be sim enhanced. And so we all believe in the importance of interdisciplinary education. Finally, our final objective is to construct a list of goals and tactics to implement best practices in utilizing IPE as an innovative teaching strategy. Okay. So our agenda for the day, we're going to go over the simulation standards of best practice. We'll overview our IPE simulation. We'll talk about the lessons that we learned, and we'll get to questions that you have. We will be monitoring the chat as we go along, and so if it's appropriate, we'll answer those questions then. We might answer your questions directly in the chat, or we might save it to the end. So, excellent. I'll hand it over to Adrienne.
So thank you. I'm excited to be on this. So my background is nursing, but I've since switched over into simulation education, and that's my focus. I'm thankful I am an SSH site reviewer for sim accreditation, and I was recently came on board at NAEMSE as one of their simulation program facilitators. So I live, breathe, eat, sleep the healthcare simulation standards of best practice. And so if you're in the sim world like me, you know that this was a recent change. The HSS-OBP is, as we can call it now, the acronym. They used to be called the NAEMSE standards of best practice, but it had the word nursing in it. So we've kind of gotten away from that, and we're broadening that out so that it's the healthcare simulation standards of best practice, because these apply to everybody, not just nursing. There are currently 10 of them that go over all the various aspects of simulation and what is required in order for that simulation experience to be valuable to the learners, all learners, either licensed, certified, brand new little baby healthcare providers. So all different types of learners benefit from following these standards of simulation best practice. And the one that we are going to talk about specifically today is simulation enhanced IPE. So again, I'm kind of the nerdy rule follower. I wanted to make sure that while I knew that this experience was going to be awesome, everybody was going to do a great job, and our learners would get something out of it, I'm also the rule follower. So I wanted to make sure that we were doing it, all of our I's were dotted, T's were crossed, to get the biggest bang for our buck, and that our learners would be impacted fully. So when we're talking about the SIM standard related to SIM IPE, there are 4 main things. The first is that you have to think about the theoretical or the conceptual framework behind why it is that we're doing what we do. And it sounds really fancy, really difficult, but the biggest premise, or the thing that kind of is the foundation of SIM IPE, is experiential learning, and Kolb is the theorist that came up with that. So for us, we adopted that Kolb's experiential learning theory, which says to get the most out of an experience, students should be hands-on, participating, proactively engaged in that learning activity. And then we also followed the NLN Jeffrey simulation theory. Again, that's that proactive, hands-on, how to conduct simulation appropriately. And then lastly, we debriefed using debriefing for meaningful learning, which is a conceptual framework that started out initially in nursing, but has since been used across a variety of disciplines. And that theory really just focuses on reflection, having students really critically reflect on what they did, why they did it, what was right, what was wrong, and what they could do better next time, which is a shift from how we normally debrief scenarios, which is just telling them, hey, you did this wrong, do better next time. So if you're interested in improving your debriefing practices, that is part 3 of our 3-part webinar series that Kim and I will be doing next week. Next month, excuse me. We're talking a lot about debriefing then. Next was to utilize best practices in the design and the development. And so some of those best practices are, it has to be realistic, it has to be challenging, there has to be mutual goals among all of the professions that are involved, and we had to ensure that there was a safe learning environment. So in terms of being realistic, that was on us. We expect our learners to buy in and to play nice and to go along with the fact that these are our actors, but we wanted them to treat them as actual patients. So we had to do our due diligence in making sure everything was as realistic as possible. And I think Amy will talk about that, and then Leslie will talk about that later, but creating realistic characters with backstories, medications that were real, the environment had to look real. So that took a lot of legwork on our part. It had to be challenging, so we had to figure out what were those clinical specific indicators that we were hoping to get out of it for our learners, and was it appropriate for the level that they were at? Because for the 3 disciplines, nursing, EMS, and dental, our students were kind of at a little bit different levels in the program, so we had to create characters or patients that would meet the needs of all 3 disciplines. Mutual goals, as Kim said, yes, we wanted our learners to do the right things clinically, but our overarching goal that we were most concerned about was that they learned about the other disciplines that were doing the simulation, learned about their scope of practice, their responsibilities, how they conducted business in their house, so that we could do a better job of conducting healthcare in our own setting. And then lastly, ensure that it was a safe learning environment. So physically, we had to make sure that the environment was free from any potential injuries. We had to address what if there was something that we couldn't prepare for that occurs. And we did have a safety timeout procedure that was announced to all students. But also psychologically safe. So as I mentioned, dental students had never simmed the way that nursing and EMS had simmed before. So we had to ensure that those students felt safe kind of walking into the simulation environment, brand new, fresh, never had experienced it before, whereas EMS and nursing had been simming for quite some time. So we reached out to dental, we paid them visits during their classroom time, just so Kim and I could show our face, be happy, smiling, and tell them this isn't scary. And we made sure that they were adequately prepared. We were not out to trick them. We wanted them to be successful, stretch their knowledge, stretch their learning, but we wanted them to be successful. So we adequately prepared them prior to coming into the scenario. Recognize and address potential barriers to SIM IPE. Again, we wanted to see a lot of folks don't have administrative support. We were very fortunate at Pikes Peak. They were all in. Not only were they willing to allow us to dedicate the time and energy of the staff, but we'd have to bring in extra staff and pay them, fund them for the extra supplies, utilization of rooms, campus security. So there are a lot of resources that went into developing and implementing this IPE. So with this standard, you really have to take an honest look at, will the folks that are in my institution support this endeavor, because it is out of the norm and it's expensive a lot of times. And then you have to provide faculty training. Going back to personnel and time, do we have the ability to train our folks who are facilitating and debriefing these SIMs to do it in the best interest of the students and the way that it should be done? And only you will be able to answer that question when you're starting the planning phase. And last, devise an appropriate evaluation plan for SIM IPE. So a lot of times in education, academia especially, we get really excited about new initiatives, everybody's on board, and then afterwards we go to do it again and people say, well, what was the result? And we have this really great anecdotal evidence, but we don't have that hard objective evidence to prove that it was worth all of the effort and the resources and the time and the money that it took to conduct it. So prior to even implementing your SIM IPE, you need to make sure you have a really solid evaluation plan that'll help you improve for the next time, but it'll also help you to solidify the need so that moving forward, you can ensure that you can replicate it time and time again. So for us, we completed an after action survey of all the facilitators that talked about the objectives. Were they met, not met? The actors were included. Anybody that wasn't a learner received that survey to tell us what was right, what was wrong, was safety maintained, and so forth. And then all of our learners received a separate survey that was specific to IPE that looked at, did you learn more about the other disciplines? Were you able to fulfill your own scope of practice? And it had really valuable information for us to move forward. So that sounds like a lot of work. Why do we do it then? So we know several things. We know that our patients have increasing complexity. Healthcare is getting harder, not easier, especially with shortages. So we want to make sure that our learners have everything that they need so that chain of custody of patient is smooth, it's seamless, and nothing gets dropped. We want our healthcare team to be able to cooperate, communicate, share skills and knowledge. Again, that is what SIM IPE can do for our students. And it's a safe way for them to learn about, from, and with each other prior to getting out into the clinical environment where they're just thrown in. So we want them to create those develop those relationships now and take down those silos that seem to happen between the disciplines. No more. We're better than that. So Amy, you want to talk about our timeline?
So this was, we were, as you can see, the end date was right around Thanksgiving time. And so we started 5 months in advance. We started in June over the summer trying to figure out what we were going to do, who our patients were going to be, how can we make this work for everybody. And so we had to figure out, well, how many nursing students do we have? How many dental assisting students do we have? How many EMS students we had? And we had more nursing and dental assisting students than we had EMS students. So the EMS students ended up, we did a morning session for half of the dental assisting students and half of the nursing students, and then an afternoon session for the other half of dental assisting and nursing and EMS. People went through it twice, so they got to be reassigned to different cases. And so it really just started off with the Kim and Adrienne and I had to learn about each other's disciplines, because this was the first time at Pikes Peak Community College we had ever really worked together in interdisciplinary. And so there was a big learning curve. Oh, well, what can your guys do? What will be interesting to you? And so we started off with a list of common emergencies that can be in the dental office, and figured out how could they progress to the emergency room where the nursing students would finally get to them. So once we figured that kind of thing out, then we came up with our objectives that Adrienne has been talking about, and we started to finalize our patients, meaning having a backstory for them. For dental assisting, that meant coming up with charts, because the whole IPE was, you have an emergency in a dental office, and what are you going to do if your patient is suddenly having a heart attack or seizing, or whatever the case might be? What are you going to do? So we had to come up with patient charts and backgrounds for my students to be able to identify what kinds of emergencies might this patient have. When you look at a health history, you can kind of get an idea of, well, this person is really prone to maybe having a heart attack. I better be on the lookout for that. So we finalized our patients and the timelines, and we started talking about how were we going to get other parts of the college involved so that everybody knew what was going on. Because another reason for this sim was to create excitement about IPE. So we had to go to our foundation and get them involved and get marketing involved, so that eventually we ended up with a news crew, a local news crew that came to film what we were doing and present to the community, hey, look what's going on at Pikes Peak Community College. So then Adrienne went on to plan what kinds of homework did the students need to do so they could kind of get an idea. So my students had already been looking at these emergencies, but nursing students had to get a list of, well, what are the common emergencies in the dental office? What might we see? As well as EMS students, to really kind of start looking at what my students had been studying, and create scripts for the actors so that the actors could have some idea about what they were getting themselves into. The equipment lists were endless. I mean, down to the finest little detail of a vial of epinephrine. Then we went on to meet with all the different student groups. So we wanted our students to know that the people running it, namely Adrienne and Kim and myself, were all on the same page. So we met with every group of students together to model first behavior of interprofessional cooperation and let them know that things were going to be just fine and all. The night before, we did a final walkthrough to make sure all of everything was set up, ready to go. And then the bomb went off on on November 27th, and it was a phenomenal experience for all.
Great.
Like Adrienne mentioned, obviously before we run an IPE, it's a little bit different than just running a scenario if we're going to run a quick scenario in the classroom. And like Amy said, this took an extensive amount of planning. So we had overarching objectives for the IPE for every student that participated. And then we had individual objectives for our disciplines. The overarching objectives for the IPE had really, I mean, we wanted each discipline to, appropriately treat the patients that we gave them. But our number one objective was for the students to understand the roles of the other disciplines. We want them to know, what does the other discipline do? Can they do clinically? What are the challenges that they face in their clinical environment? And because that's the goal of IPE. Then, of course, we want the students to be able to appropriately care for the patients that they are treating during the IPE. And then we want them to apply, of course, their discipline-specific knowledge. Excellent. Thank you.
So I think I'll start for Amy because I know she had to run out a little bit because she has class now, so she's going to get them settled. But so for dental assisting, like Amy mentioned, they had a course where they were looking at the top 10 dental emergencies. And so she wanted her students to be able to anticipate those medical emergencies based on the patient history. You know, what might this patient have difficulty with or present with? She wanted them to be able to identify the emergency, and thanks to awesome actors like Leslie, they really were able to identify that quickly. It was very realistic. Then we wanted them to manage the medical emergency until EMS arrived, and it wasn't instantaneous. We let them manage that for a few minutes before EMS was on scene. And then we wanted the dental assisting students to provide an effective handoff report to EMS.
And the way that our IPE was structured, we had 5 simultaneous emergencies that occurred within the dental assisting lab. And so the emergencies transpired. The dental assisting students were given a specified amount of time to respond before the paramedic students arrived. During that time, the paramedic students and the nursing students were watching this, the dental assisting students treat the emergency within the dental lab, and which was phenomenal because, I mean, Adrienne and I learned so much about dental assisting, and I know that our students did too. I had no idea all the scope of practice that a dental assisting student had. And so it was such a great opportunity for us to learn about dental assisting, and I know that our students felt the same way. Once EMS or paramedic students were responded, their discipline-specific learning objectives were to receive a handoff from the dental assisting students. Then they triaged their patient, and then they managed their patient-specific conditions. And then they had the transport time, and then they handed the student or the patients off to the nursing students.
And again, a big game of whisper down the lane. Our nursing students then received the handoff report from EMS. Hopefully they were able to effectively manage the patient's conditions according to the protocols and the order sets that they had provided to them prior to, and then utilize effective communication techniques while they were there within the ER setting. And so it sounds like a lot of handoff, but as you know, communication is unfortunately a big proponent for errors. And so one of the 5 scenarios that we ran, there actually was a medication error because things were not handed off appropriately from discipline to discipline to discipline. So nursing did not know that the patient had received a medication and then doubled up on the dose. So it was a really, really great learning opportunity. So Amy, you want to talk about the cases we used?
So these were the 5 cases we came up with, and it was probably a bit ambitious to have 5 emergencies going on all at the same time. We overwhelmed our doctor. We actually got a couple of dentists, one for the morning and one for the afternoon, and the doctor was like, well, wait a minute, I have 5 patients that are having 5 different emergencies, and they were having a hard time figuring out how to prioritize, because they had 5 students saying, doctor, my patient is showing this, what do you want me to do? Or I can do this, shall I do this? And so our doctors were a little overwhelmed, but we decided to go with chest pain. We had a person who had an allergic reaction to some latex and had anaphylaxis. The moulage on the patient was amazing with all sorts of rashes and everything. We had a person lose consciousness. We had a simulation mannequin who had a seizure. And then we had a patient who was up at the front desk in the dental office and was sucking on a candy and suffered airway obstruction because it went down the wrong pipe.
So a wide variety. And again, that's where the actors came in. And we're going to get Leslie's perspective here in a minute. But I want to talk about that prep, because we said we need this to be safe for our students, both physically and psychologically. And we're not out to get them. We're not out to trick them. We want them adequately prepared. So we made sure that all 3 disciplines, students had the policy and procedures, that they knew what to expect and how things were supposed to be run. And we required that they acknowledge that and signed it. They were given a brief summary of the common dental emergencies that they might see while in the dental clinic. They were given those 3 overarching objectives as to work within your own and observe the other team. We provided them homework questions. Those homework questions, again, were specific to what is the scope of practice of the other disciplines, as well as some discipline-specific questions to adequately prepare them for the care that they would provide during their section of the IPE. We provided them with information about our standardized actors, both safety and information about the clothing that they would wear and what they can and cannot cut off. How to call a safety timeout if one was necessary, as well as the campus map, just some basic logistics. Where's the elevator that fit the stretcher to get up and down the stairs, bathrooms, those sorts of things. We just wanted to make sure they had the basic logistics. So in terms of potential barriers to success, from the logistical overarching planning, the scheduling, getting everybody to the table is sometimes the hardest, because we all are busy. We all have a million things going on. So making that bridge and getting everybody to cross it is sometimes the hardest work, but it's 99% of the battle. Once you've got everybody to the table, everyone brings their expert opinions and their great ideas, and the ball gets rolling. But scheduling faculty, students, and actors was difficult, and as well as training them. The best laid plans involve a lot of preparation. So we had to make sure that our faculty, our students, our actors, everybody was adequately trained, so that all of those moving parts that were going on and all of that organized chaos equated to a really good educational product for our students. So Leslie, I think this is your time to shine now. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the acting side, what you saw, what you felt, just your expert opinion on that.
Thank you, Adrienne. As a volunteer, it is very difficult to get enough actors because we don't get paid for this. It is all of our own free time to give back to all of these disciplines. So that was a major challenge of that day, as we remember. So from my perspective, since I'm incredibly dedicated to the success of this program, I always like to receive my information ahead of time. So when I come in, I am almost in character before the participants see me. So Adrienne has to be organized enough to give me all that information. And then I have to take the time to internalize it all, so I'm ready to go that day. And you can't always find enough people that have enough time to give to that, to be as dedicated. But it does make for a better time. And as we found out, you also have to have backups that can help out when life happens. Mm-hmm. So, Adrienne?
Well, and I'd like to put a plug out for standardized actors. Again, a lot of folks, we rely on volunteers. And Leslie, just to give her kudos, she has participated within that program for years and years. And so much so that as the nursing students graduated, they were inviting her to their graduation and to their pinning ceremony, because she played such a vital role in their overall education and a variety of roles. God bless her, she would do whatever we ask her to do. So, and it's really important to develop those relationships and to maintain that level of commitment from your SPs, from your standardized patients, that you adequately prepare them and give them the respect of not being disorganized. Be organized, give them that information well ahead of time so that they want to do a good job. So that's super important. But multiple campus locations and backup equipment. Kim, do you want to talk about that?
Yes, at this point, and actually even still, we are at multiple campus locations. At this point, we ran this IPE at our Rampart Range campus. where our nursing department and our dental assisting department was housed, but EMS was housed off campus at our Creekside campus. And so that meant we needed to move every piece of equipment that paramedic students would need from Creekside to our Rampart Range campus, which meant that if I forgot something, we did not have that equipment. And as I suspect you guys are, we run a little bit different than nursing, that we fly by the seat of our pants a little bit more than Adrienne does, which is why we work really well together, because Adrienne balances me better. Because if you notice back at that timeline, right, we started planning in June and we ran this in November. If we were doing this, like I would have started planning at November 1st to run this in November, which would never have worked for Adrienne and Amy. And it certainly would not have worked for me getting my equipment to campus or organizing my students. And so the equipment list, as we walked through, that final walkthrough the night before, was really important because it allowed me that opportunity to go back to campus, grab any equipment that I might have missed. And the other really important thing is, if my equipment failed, I didn't have a backup. And so I brought just the specific equipment that we would need to run the IPE, which quite frankly, because we ran 5 simultaneous emergencies, it tapped all of my available equipment. And so I did not have backup equipment to use. And so obviously we're EMS, and so we know, we'll just roll with it. If equipment fails, we're going to roll with it. However, with simulation, we want to have as much suspension of disbelief as possible. So I don't want my students to just be, if they need epi for the anaphylaxis, I want them to pull epi out of their jump kits. I don't want them to pull, something, Ativan out of their jump kit and pretend like it's epinephrine. So I wanted to make sure that we had all of that there, because I don't want to break that suspension of disbelief. And then who's talking about our different cohort sizes, Amy?
Well, I think Amy already mentioned it a little bit, just how we had to, it was a potential barrier to success, but despite that, we got a lot right. And so we were able to figure out the logistics of having the smaller cohort size of the paramedic students and the larger cohorts of dental and EMS. So there were, again, we talked about potential barriers of success on the last slide. And this slide is really just celebrating our successes, because we got a lot right, especially considering this was a pilot. This was the first time we were running this scenario all together. And when, they say the expression, go big or go home, we went big and we were still successful. So as kind of the logistics person, I was most happy with the way that we came together as a team, and that relationship that was developed has sustained since then, because we were all in the trenches together. Leadership was bought in, gave us all of the resources we needed, and then some. And when I went to them and said, hey, I'm going to have to pay 2 more adjuncts to facilitate, no problem. We were able to do what we need with the resources that we needed. And like I said, the relationships that were forged between the disciplines have sustained. And so the way that everybody came together was really, I think, a big takeaway for me as a sim educator.
One of the things that I thought was really important was the development of a common language. And so as we start to move forward in simulation, because we're starting to see simulation as a really important pedagogy in healthcare sciences, but we don't all use the same language in simulation. And so, which makes it really confusing, right? Like, it's really hard if we all start talking about, the same thing, but with different languages, and which is what we found that we were doing. Mm-hmm. And so part of us coming together as a team was starting to use the same language. And that was incredibly beneficial to us.
especially when we were developing health histories and
Yeah.
you know, the strips that you guys had that you ran and all that. It was really interesting. And I have to say that it's been mentioned before, but that the dental assistants had never done sim before, ever, like this, with actors and everything getting staged and all. And after the experience, they said, we want more. And we do that all the time. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, do you know what we went through to get this done? Well, we want more. And when they went out into their dental offices for their internships, we actually had some students run into some medical emergencies, the ones that had been in the sim. And the report that I got back from my doctors in internship was, your students were amazing. They held it together. They knew how to stay calm. They knew what to do. And I believe that it was in large part because they had this simulation experience and they knew how to communicate.
Right. Well, and I think with the next point there, we had the right people at the table and we all shared the spotlight. This wasn't nursing sim. This wasn't EMS's sim. This was all of our sims. And as Kim mentioned, or Amy mentioned, we had marketing and foundation. We had everybody at the table from the get-go because we knew this was going to be big. Campus police and security was not an afterthought. They were there from the get-go because we knew we were going to need a lot of traffic control and there would be a lot going on in the building. Just making sure everybody was at the table and we had a really comprehensive view of what all this would entail ahead of time was a strength that I feel that we had. Safety, both for the students and the actors, because again, there's a lot of motion. You know, poor Leslie was being put onto a cot, then the cot to the bed. So there's a lot of room for safety issues there. And thankfully, we did not have any physical or psychological safety issues. And Leslie, I don't know if you want to talk about the success of the prep for you.
Definitely being prepared walking in and having the other actors that were also dedicated to this. We mentioned our foundation several times, and we did have one of them, the president of the foundation was one of our actors. Mm-hmm. And that was a great utilization of resources because we know she is buying into this. Yeah. So she was ready to go and a great actor. And if you can find actors who are associated with your facility that are dedicated to the success of it, you're ahead of the ballgame right there. Mm-hmm. You just take people off the street, they may or may not work out. But if people are already involved and have the buy-in, it's awesome. And being prepped ahead of time, it's the only way you can be successful.
Yeah. And our students reflected that too. So part of the evaluation, the next slide, I have direct quotes, but there was not a single, we felt stupid, we felt you were out to trick us, this was too hard. They felt very much like we were setting them up for success and setting them up to learn. And so I think along with the leadership folks that ran the simulation coming together, the students as well, and just seeing them in the hall actually acknowledging one another is kind of another little bonus success, I think. And then, as Amy mentioned, we had actual dentists that were working in the dental clinic, helping to give the orders to the dental assisting students. And then we had a real ER physician in our ER for the nursing students to go to give report and to receive orders from. So we feel like that was really a success of the experience for them as well.
Well, and another thing that really made it realistic as well was we had people outside of the dental clinic on cell phones, and we had their cell phones posted in the dental clinic as this is the 911 number you're going to call. So when my students called 911, they got an actual EMS, somebody that would treat it like a real call. So they were calling saying, what's your location? What's going on? And it was just that realistic.
Yeah, it goes back to that suspension of disbelief. We made it, excuse me, as realistic to every participant as possible.
Yeah, and you can read the evaluations there. The student quotes speak for themselves. Not only did they think it was fun, but they saw the value in it in terms of what they were getting out of it for their education. So we do have a few lessons learned. Like Amy said, students want more IPE. Even now in COVID times, we're finding innovative ways to conduct IPE. And so we would encourage you to still be safe, but it is possible to do it. As Leslie mentioned, second string actors, not that they're not as good, but things come up. And we did have that happen quite a bit on that day. Things came up last minute. And so we did have to find a couple last minute actors that we were prepping as quickly as we could last minute, but we probably should have had a plan B with actors and had them kind of like an understudy and had them prepped ahead of time so that if they did need to come in, they were already adequately prepped and we weren't doing that last minute before the sim started. Amy, Kim, want to talk about the others?
Yeah, like I said, we had done, when we structured the IPE, we had students in our dental office that were watching the emergencies happen. And so what that meant was that our EMS and nursing students knew the case as soon as it occurred. And so it also meant that we had to tell the students from the very beginning, you don't know anything other than what you've been told. So the emergency would happen, EMS would watch, and then they would leave, go get their stuff, come into the dental office, receive the handoff from the dental assistants, and then become engaged in the emergency itself. Once EMS would start to transport, then dental assisting and nursing would start watching how the paramedic students would treat that patient. And then during transport to the nursing lab, what handoff would occur between the paramedic students and the nursing students. And then dental and the paramedic students would watch nursing take over care of that patient. What that meant was that in addition to, handoff, you're not supposed to know anything until you get it, but EMS and nursing did have an advantage, of course, in that patient care because they saw the entire event and all of the care transpire. And so, so we discussed that there needs to be additional, we need to modify, although we didn't figure out how, but we may need to modify how the other students observe that dental phase. Like, how can we modify that so that they don't know everything about the patient, but they still can learn about how the dental students or the EMS students are caring for those patients.
Well, and that's a double-edged sword. So the whole purpose of this sim was for all of our students to learn about the other disciplines. So one of the ways that we did come up with it is maybe they repeat it. So first round, they're able to watch, they see scope of practice of all of the disciplines, and then second round, they switch. So if I'm a nursing student and I observe chest pain first round, then maybe my second go round, I have a seizure patient, but I don't get to see the succession of the patient moving through the healthcare team. So there are a lot of ways you can do it. It's just determining what that overarching objective is. And maybe it's both. Maybe you want them to see on one round and then come in blind like we do in healthcare for round 2. But as you see on the last point there, you may need to run it over multiple semesters. So it would be a lot to repeat, especially for the dental folks that have never simmed before. It may be helpful for them even to come in and sim with us before the IPE, where they're the ones starting with the medical emergency. So it's not so much a lesson learned. I think it's an opportunity for further development of what we got started.
Right, exactly.
So this is our slide. We have ended at what, 12:46 East time. So we have about 10-15 minutes. We want to answer questions. We want to discuss any concerns or obstacles that you may have experienced in starting your own IPE programs. And we're just here to help support that and brainstorm with you.
And one of the one of the questions, excuse me, that had come up was, did we record the event? And we did not record this event because of the way that it was located. The moving pieces, the dental office was really tight with all of the this was pre-COVID. And so post-COVID, we would definitely not have been able to do that. And so,
we had 50 people crammed into a dental clinic.
It was a little tight.
To look back on the photos now in light of COVID is yeah, it feels like a different world. But it worked. We even went so far to talk about the level of OCD and logistics. We even went so far as to take painter's tape, and we made X's on the floor of the dental office to show students where to stand, so that they would be out of the way of the flow of the cots with EMS. So we were very detailed, logistically oriented, because we wanted it to be efficient and organized. And thankfully it did come off that way, even though we had a ton of folks in a very small space.
Well, and Adrienne is being very, very gracious, but it was Adrienne.
Yes, it was.
It was Adrienne.
Yes, it was.
I'm trying to pass my OCD off to other folks too.
But all of I learned so much about SIM and everything that goes into it. Yeah, I had my part to do, but Adrienne was the driving force.
Thank you.
Yes, she was. And as far as the ambulances go, excuse me, like she said, we had painter's tape that we sectioned off parts of a hallway, and that's the students would transport the patient out of the dental office to their designated spots in the hallway, where they would treat the patients for a specific amount of time. And then they would transport those, after they'd patch, they'd transport the patients into the nursing simulation space, and then give handoff.
And of course, since it was happening in the public hallways, we had
students and
other students who had no idea what was going on. Going, whoa, what's going on? Why are all these people on gurneys?
Which is why it was really important to tell campus police what was going on. We had to notify everyone in advance that this was all simulation. And and like Adrienne or Amy had mentioned before, we had one mannequin that we used that simulated a seizure. Otherwise, we had actors for everything. And so it appeared as though we had a lot of medical emergencies happening right now. And so it was really important that we told campus police that this was just a simulated event. And we wanted to make sure that they knew that nothing else was going on. So that way, if they were getting notification, that they knew that they could ignore that.
So do we have any questions or comments? Anybody want to help brainstorm with anything? We can stay on here for a few more moments to see if any questions come in, but otherwise, I think that's it. We're just happy to be here, happy to share. And again, a plug for next month. Kim and I will be doing another session on debriefing. And it's
our favorite title.
Go ahead.
Do you even debrief, bro?
Yes, so we're very excited about that one. It'll be a lively conversation, I'm sure. All right, well, I don't see any questions coming in.
Excellent. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you all so much for presenting. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
And to our attendees, I put the link to register for your CEU in the chat. If you missed that, I will make sure it goes out in our follow-up email tomorrow. And I think that's everything.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. See you
Have a
next
great
month.
day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.